Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are going to unpack something pretty mind-blowing. We're diving straight into the deep end of the Old Testament's cultic Torah, specifically the book of Leviticus and the back half of Exodus. We're going to look at the profound symbolism, the ancient sanctuary, the priesthood, and the visceral, bloody reality of ancient sacrifice. So let's just jump right in. Let's kick this off with a bit of a provocative question. If you knew exactly who you were meeting when you walked into worship on Sunday morning, what would you wear? How would you actually act? Our casual modern approach to worship kind of treats the divine like, well, a close buddy you'd grab coffee with. But if we truly grasped the sheer magnitude of stepping into the presence of the Holy One, man, our entire posture would probably look entirely different. Author Annie Dillard actually hit the nail on the head here. She famously suggested that if we had any idea into whose presence we were coming, we wouldn't just slouch in. No way. We'd go there wearing helmets and flak jackets, literally strapped into our pews. It's a funny image, but it highlights the awe and, frankly, the danger of approaching God. And the ancient Israelites, they understood this reality all too well. And that brings us to this really stark paradox right at the heart of the cultic Torah. Think about it. On one hand, you've got this immense, transcendent wealth and beauty of the tabernacle, all crafted from the riches they brought out of Egypt, perfectly reflecting God's sublime majesty. But then, juxtaposed directly against that stunning beauty, you have the messy, bloody, and painful reality of animal sacrifice. It's literally the glory of God crashing head-on into the absolute horror of human sin, all in one physical space. So, why did this intense system even need to exist? Well, let's look at the timeline for a second. Up at Mount Sinai, the Israelites get the 10 Commandments, and they have this massive covenant feast. Everything's great, right? But almost immediately, while Moses is still up on the mountain, Aaron goes and builds the golden calf. It's the ultimate mess, a total rebellion that instantly breaks the covenant they just made. Moses comes down, literally shatters the stone tablets in response. But here's the wild part. Right after this colossal failure, God turns around and orders the construction of the sanctuary. It's an act of unbelievable mercy. Instead of leaving, God chooses to actually stay and tent among his people. He tells them to build a structure, and it's defined by three really rich Hebrew words. First, there's mikdash, which means a sanctuary that is entirely set apart. Second is mishkan, coming from a root word meaning to dwell, or basically to be a neighbor. And third, ohel moed, the tent of meeting. Against all odds, God is choosing to be their neighbor. Now, building this thing was fascinating. The tabernacle was constructed using frames made of acacia wood. Now, acacia is a tough tree. It grows out in the incredibly arid Sinai Peninsula, where there's almost no rain, so it has to send its roots super deep into the earth just to survive. So you have these tough, deep-rooted wooden frames, and then they're surrounded by curtains. It's a powerful visual symbol, right? It says that while God is dwelling right in the middle of the tribes, his presence is still completely set apart. And this whole setup creates a very deliberate spatial walkthrough. Imagine you're an ancient worshiper. You'd move from the chaotic outside world into the courtyard. Then the priests would move further into the holy place. And finally, just once a year, the high priest would enter the most holy place. It's this step-by-step progression, moving deeper and deeper into the terrifying yet beautiful presence of God. Let's walk through it. Stepping into it, that courtyard, you'd be instantly hit with a visceral, almost overwhelming sensory experience. Right in front of you is the massive bronze altar, complete with horns on its corners. This is where the bloody reality of sin is dealt with head-on. Worshippers would bring their animals here to be sacrificed, which graphically demonstrated the horrific cost of their actions. And right between this altar and the tent itself stood the laver, a large bronze wash basin, because, as you can imagine, after dealing with all that gore, the priests required some serious cleansing before even thinking about approaching the holy place. It's right there at that bronze altar that we hit our first heavy theological concept, propitiation. Now, Leviticus 17 tells us that the life of a creature is in its blood. Propitiation simply means appeasing God's righteous wrath against sin through the shedding of that blood. So the animal is literally taking the place of the sinner whose life was forfeit. It's heavy stuff. And directly tied to that is another crucial word, expiation. While propitiation is about appeasing God's wrath, expiation is about the permanent canceling of the sin itself. It means that because this sacrificial blood has been shed, the debt you owed is entirely wiped clean, gone. These two concepts, propitiation and expiation, work together every single day right there in the dust and blood of the tabernacle courtyard. Okay, so moving deeper past the courtyard, the priests would enter the holy place, and the spatial symbolism just keeps building. On the north side, you've got the table of showbread, which represents physical sustenance, and actually points forward to the ultimate bread of life. On the south side is the lampstand. It's continually burning, visually connecting light to God's spirit. And then, right before the next veil, sits the altar of incense. The sweet smoke from this altar literally acted as a protective cloud of prayer for the priest. Finally, we go behind that heavy veil, stepping into the most holy place. This inner sanctum was a perfect square, and it housed exactly one item, the Ark of the Covenant. You can think of it essentially as a sacred chest, and its purpose? To hold the very stone tablets of the testimony, the rules of the covenant that the Israelites had broken, but that God had so mercifully renewed. The absolute crucial point of this room, though, is the lid of that ark. It was known as the atonement cover, or the kippurah. Actually, you can probably hear the root for Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, right there in that word. This cover was completely overshadowed by the wings of cherubim. And think about it. Just like cherubim guarded the way back to the tree of life in the Garden of Eden, here they are, guarding the presence of God. This lid was the ultimate focal point for making things right between God and humanity. Now, to navigate this incredibly dangerous and holy space, the Israelites desperately needed mediators. I mean, you couldn't just have anyone waltz in there. These priests had to be strictly set apart through a very specific ancient ordination process called mashach. And that word literally translates to smear with oil. What's actually super fascinating here is the linguistic journey of that specific word. So the Hebrew verb for smearing with oil, mashach, gives us the noun Mashiach, which means Messiah, or the Anointed One. And when that word gets translated into Greek, it becomes Christos, or Christ. So think about the implication. Every single time a priest was anointed with oil in that ancient tabernacle, it was a direct foreshadowing of the ultimate Anointed One who was to come. The ordination of these priests was incredibly physical, too. I mean, beyond just smearing that special oil, the ritual involved placing sacrificial blood right on the priest's right ear, symbolizing that they need to hear God's word correctly. Then blood on the right thumb to symbolize doing the right actions. And finally, blood on the big toe to symbolize walking appropriately in God's ways. They were literally covered head to toe in the requirements of holiness. When you step back and look at it, this entire ancient structure, the precise architecture, the blood, the incense, the mediators, the whole shebang was actually a massive, immersive educational tool. It was God preparing humanity for the ultimate reality of Emmanuel. And Emmanuel, a name we get from the prophet Isaiah, literally translates to God with us. The tabernacle was always the roadmap pointing straight to the incarnation. And guys, this brings so much incredible depth to a very famous passage in the New Testament. When the Gospel of John says, "The Word became flesh and dwelt among us," the literal Greek word used there actually means tented. The Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. Jesus is the ultimate manifestation of the sanctuary. He is God stepping right into our messy, physical world to pitch his tent right next to ours. The writer of Hebrews makes this connection crystal clear. Unlike those ancient high priests who had to endlessly repeat those messy, bloody sacrifices day after day for both their own sins and the people's, Jesus changes everything. He acts as both the ultimate, once-for-all sacrifice and the permanent high priest. He sat down at the right hand of God, and he always lives to intercede for us. It's a real game changer. Yet even with this permanent, beautiful solution in place, the writers of the New Testament are quick to remind us not to lose our sense of reverence. Hebrews 12 literally tells us to worship God with fear and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. Yes, Jesus is our closest friend. Absolutely. But he is also the transcendent creator of the universe. The terrifying majesty of approaching the Holy One, yeah, that definitely still remains. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought to really chew on. If the ancient tabernacle was humanity's immersive map back to the Garden of Eden, how does understanding its bloody, awe-inspiring paradox change the way you approach the holy today? Seriously, when you step into worship, do you carry the weight of that kind of grace? Think about that as you go about your week. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the cultic Torah. Keep learning, keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.